They say no one notices the janitors. Not really. Not in a building like this, glass polished like mirrors, ceilings so high they seem to scrape heaven, and suits walking fast enough to leave people behind. No one looks twice at a cleaning cart. No one asks the name of the girl behind it. But someone was watching her. Every morning at precisely 7:40 a.m., Amelia entered the west lobby of the Carrington Tower. Her footsteps were quiet, her uniform pressed, her brown hair tied back in a bun that had become more habit than style. She never looked around. She never spoke unless spoken to. She kept her eyes low and her pace steady. And every morning, one man sat waiting, corner chair, black leather, always with a book in hand but never turning the pages. The security cameras captured it. So did the front desk staff, but no one dared say anything, because that man, he owned the building. His name was Victor Hale, CEO of Hale Enterprises, billionaire, visionary, untouchable, except when it came to her. She had no idea, not that he waited, not that he'd noticed her the very first day she'd stepped off the service elevator, nervously adjusting her badge. She dropped her glove that morning, and as she bent down to grab it, her hand had trembled, just slightly. That tremble had stayed with him. Victor didn't believe in chance, not in business, and definitely not in people. But something about that moment had unsettled him in a way years of corporate warfare never had. He watched every day. And she kept passing him by, not because she was rude, but because Amelia had trained herself not to be seen. It was safer that way, easier to survive when no one knew your story. What she didn't know was that her silence was speaking louder than most people's voices. He noticed how she always left a book in the lost and found pile, one no one ever claimed. How she hummed under her breath when no one was near. How she tucked a small notebook into her cart, scribbling things when she thought no one was looking. He wasn't supposed to care. Until one morning, she didn't come. 7:40 to past, then 7:50, then 8:10. His book lay unopened. The lobby felt colder somehow. The hum of conversation, the tap of shoes, none of it filled the strange emptiness she usually brushed away just by being there. Then, at 8:27, she appeared. Her face was pale, her steps slower. No cart, just her and a worn messenger bag across her shoulder. She walked past him like always, but this time, she dropped something, a paper, folded. It floated to the marble floor, right beside his chair. She didn't turn back. Victor bent down, unfolded it. It was a note. One line, handwritten. Some people survive by becoming invisible, others by pretending not to see. He read it 3 times. The next morning, he didn't bring a book. He didn't wait in silence. He brought something else, a white mug. He placed it carefully on the small table next to his chair. Inside, warm chamomile tea, no sugar, no lemon. Just as she once served the older receptionist during flu season. He didn't say a word, just waited. When Amelia arrived, her eyes flicked just once to the cup, and for the first time in 3 months, she looked at him. Only for a second, but it was enough to change everything. Because sometimes, the greatest stories don't begin with loud declarations or dramatic entrances. They start in silence, in overlooked corners, in a single glance between two people no one ever thought would meet. And when those stories unfold, they change more than hearts. They rewrite lives. The next morning, Victor arrived earlier than usual. Not because he had a meeting, not because of a schedule change. He just couldn't sleep. The image of Amelia's eyes, those brief, startled, deeply human eyes, had followed him into his dreams and refused to leave when he woke. He sat in the lobby chair again, only this time he wasn't watching to pass the time. He was waiting for something he didn't quite understand yet. At exactly 7:42, the elevator chimed. She stepped out, cleaning cart in hand again, as if yesterday had been a break in the rhythm, a glitch in the matrix. But Victor could see the difference, the way she moved slower near his side, the way her fingers hovered for just a second longer near the edge of the cart. She hadn't forgotten the cup, neither had he. This time, the tea was peppermint. He had researched the scent she wore, not her perfume. She didn't wear any. But once when she passed by, he caught the faintest trace of peppermint oil, the kind used to ease headaches, That tiny detail had stuck. She didn't speak. She didn't take the cup. But her eyes, in that brief second of quiet acknowledgement, softened. Victor stayed long after she disappeared into the east hallway. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for anymore. It wasn't love, he didn't even know her. It wasn't guilt or obsession. It was something rarer, a pull, a connection he couldn't explain. But the building buzzed around him like always. Phones ringing, executives in a rush, and no one noticing that one of the most powerful men in the city hadn't been to his office. In over an hour, he finally stood, brushing invisible lint from his cuff, and turned toward the elevator. His assistant, Harper, stood at the far end of the lobby with a tablet in hand, her brow furrowed. "You keep doing this, people will start asking questions," she said under her breath. "Let them," he replied, eyes still on the hallway where Amelia had disappeared. "You know the board already thinks I'm aware." Harper hesitated, then her voice softened. "She's just a maid, Victor." He turned then, fully, calm, but firm. "No, she's not." The next day, the cup was already there when Amelia arrived. She stared at it like it was a trap, a message, a riddle. There was no tea inside this time. Instead, a note, folded carefully. One line written in clean, steady handwriting. "What if someone saw you and didn't look away?" She didn't pick it up, not right away, but she did glance at him. Her hand trembled slightly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Then she moved on, silent, almost ghost-like again. But Victor smiled to himself, because it was enough. For the first time in years, he felt something moving inside his chest, something long buried beneath spreadsheets, power meetings, and luxury so thick it had turned to armor. Something human. Later that week, a shift began. Amelia arrived with her usual calm, but now she slowed her pace near his chair. Once, he even caught the corner of her mouth twitch upward before she caught herself. He didn't press. He didn't speak. He just kept leaving the cup, sometimes with tea, sometimes with nothing but a folded thought. Not everyone who sees you wants to change you. Being quiet isn't the same as being small. You're not invisible. Not to me. No answers came. But one day, she left something behind. Not a note, not a smile, a book. It was tucked neatly into the bottom shelf of the cart she parked, briefly near his chair, its cover worn, corners folded. A poetry collection. Inside the front cover, 3 words written in pencil: "Don't return it." He did in single quotes. Instead, he read every page, and for the first time in his life, the CEO who built empires found himself underlining phrases like they were stock forecasts. "The loneliest people carry the kindest eyes. To be seen is the rarest kind of gift." Days passed, then weeks. Something was building, but neither of them dared name it. Then came the moment that changed everything. A man in a blue blazer entered the lobby one morning, loud, careless, laughing with his phone pressed to his ear. He bumped Amelia's cart, hard enough to spill a tray of cleaning supplies onto the floor. The man didn't stop. He didn't even apologize. Amelia scrambled to clean it up, cheeks burning. No one helped, until Victor stood, walked over, and bent down beside her. No words, just silence. And then gently he helped her place each item back into place. One by one, the entire lobby froze. No one had ever seen Victor kneel for anything. He stood slowly, then offered her the book she'd left behind the day before. No one said a word, not even her. But as she took it, their fingers brushed, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The next day, she didn't come to work. Or the next, or the one after that. And that's when Victor realized something. She hadn't just changed his morning routine. She'd changed his reason for showing up. And now, she was gone, just like that. But he wasn't going to let the story end there. Not without understanding the one thing that had become more important than all the deals, meetings, and wealth he'd ever chased. Why someone so gentle had chosen to disappear, and what it would take to make her want to be seen again. The security guard shifted awkwardly at the front desk, unsure if he should say something. Victor Hale had been pacing the marble floors of the lobby for 20 minutes. No briefcase, no assistant, no expression. Just silence. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit. Today, it was a gray sweater, slightly rumpled, the sleeves pushed to his elbows like someone who had stopped caring how the world saw him. But he did care. That's what scared him. Because Victor hadn't realized how much space Amelia took up in his world until she wasn't in it. Her absence wasn't loud, but it was heavy, like the weight of words never spoken. He had tried everything, asked the building's housekeeping supervisor, offered to increase her salary threefold, even reached out to HR under the guise of reevaluation. But the answer was always the same. She didn't quit. She vanished, no notice, no explanation. Just a silence that stretched further than the lobby's high ceilings. Victor sat again in his corner chair. For the first time, he noticed how cold the leather felt. He used to find comfort in a torture routine, but now it felt like a throne with no kingdom. He opened the poetry book she had left behind. He had read it cover to cover, twice, but he returned to the same page, always the same page. The ones who vanish quietly are often screaming the loudest. And then he made a decision. He wouldn't wait anymore. He would find her, not to ask why she left, but to give her a reason to return. The next morning, Harper found him in his office, papers scattered, old files opened, a map of employee addresses on his screen. "You can't track a maid like a market trend," she said quietly. "She's not just a maid," Victor replied, without looking up. "And I'm not just curious." Harper didn't argue. Not this time. She simply placed a folder in front of him. "What's this?" She worked part-time at a community library on weekends, Harper said. Volunteered with a local youth shelter. No records since last Thursday. But it's a start. Victor stared at the address, then stood. He wasn't sure what he'd find, but the ache in his chest refused to let him sit still another day. He arrived at the library by noon. A narrow building tucked between a laundromat and a florist. Inside, the scent of paper and dust settled over him like memory. He asked for her name. The woman at the front desk tilted her head. "Amelia, she hasn't been in. But she left something here last week. Said someone might come for it." Victor's heart thud. The woman returned with a slim envelope, plain, sealed. His name written in pencil. Victor Halil opened it slowly. Inside, a single note. "Don't search for me. Some people are meant to remain unclaimed." But she had signed it. That changed everything. Because people who truly want to disappear don't sign their names. He turned the card over. On the back, an address, not a library, not a shelter, a music hall. Small, forgotten, but alive. That evening, he drove across town, parked, sat in the back of a shadowed theater where rows of folding chairs lined a narrow stage. And then, he saw her. On stage. Not in uniform, not cleaning. She was reading. A spoken word event. Her voice shaking but clear. Her poem, "I am not invisible. I am simply quiet. I do not need to be rescued. But sometimes I want to be found." Victor didn't move. He didn't clap when it ended. Didn't speak to her afterward. He just listened. Because for the first time, she wasn't hiding. And he wouldn't ruin that moment with expectation. Instead, as he left, he wrote his own note. He asked the event coordinator to give it to her. It read, "You don't have to come back. But if you do, there will always be a cup waiting. Not because I need something from you, but because I finally saw someone worth waiting for." He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. And that night, for the first time in weeks, he finally slept. Not because the waiting was over, but because, sometimes, the act of searching is the answer. And hope doesn't always knock. Sometimes, it simply waits quietly until it's noticed. The music hall was dark again. Empty stage, folded chairs, echoes of words spoken days ago still clinging faintly to the walls like dust that refused to settle. Victor had returned 3 more times. She never came back. He didn't know if she had seen the note. He didn't know if she ever would. But he kept going. Not out of obsession. He wasn't chasing her. He was waiting. There was a difference. Because some people don't need to be followed. They need to be given space. A safe distance where they can choose whether to return or not. That was what he owed her now. He left no messages. No more letters. He went back to his office. Back to meetings. Back to his usual chair in the lobby. But the cup stayed on the table beside him every morning at 7:42. Some noticed. The front desk staff whispered, "She's not coming back. He's still waiting. What's the point?" But he didn't explain himself, because the story hadn't ended. He could feel it. Then one morning, at 7:46 for minutes late, something changed. A cup appeared, not placed by his hand. It sat there, quietly steaming. Jasmine tea. No note, no fanfare. Victor stared at it for a full 10 seconds before he realized what it meant. She had been here, somehow, without him seeing her, without anyone noticing. And just like that, the game had shifted. The girl who once tried to be invisible was now choosing when to be seen. He smiled. Not the public smile. Not the polished one reserved for shareholders and speeches. A real one, quiet, surprised, grateful. She was writing her own story now, and he was reading every page as carefully as he could. 2 days passed, then a week. The cup appeared every other morning now, sometimes warm, sometimes empty, but always there. Sometimes a sugar cube, sometimes a flower tucked inside the handle. Once, a paper crane made from a receipt. No messages, no names, just presence. It was the most honest conversation he'd had in years, until one morning, she stood there again. This time, not passing through, not disappearing. She stood a few feet away from his chair, watching him the way someone watches the sky before deciding if they trust the rain. She held a folder in her hands, worn, bent at the corners, and when she stepped forward, she didn't offer tea. She offered that folder. He took it slowly, looked at her. Still no words. Not yet. She nodded, once, then walked away. Inside the folder, artwork, drawings, watercolor, pencil sketches, half-finished faces and wide, wandering eyes. Her world. All. The things she never said out loud were there in color and charcoal. And tucked between the pages a note, handwritten, "You waited, so I'll show you who I am." Victor closed the folder with both hands, held it like something sacred. For a man who had built his life on strategy, logic, and timing, this felt like stepping into a storm without an umbrella, and choosing to stay. He didn't tell his board, didn't explain to his assistant why he started sketching quietly at night, didn't say why the office hours grew shorter and his mornings longer. He didn't have to, because something was being built, quietly, carefully. Not a romance, not a project. But trust. And trust, real trust, takes time. One morning, she was sitting in the chair across from him. No tea, no folder, just her. Her hands were clasped together in her lap, her eyes watching the floor, but her body wasn't turned away anymore. Victor waited. Then softly, she said the first words she'd ever spoken to him. "I didn't think someone like you could sit still long enough to see someone like me." He didn't answer right away. He didn't want to ruin the moment with the wrong sentence. So instead, he said what he truly meant. "I didn't know I needed to sit still until I saw you." A quiet passed between them, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty. Then she looked up. Her eyes weren't guarded anymore. They were open, curious, and a little brave. "You don't know anything about me," she said, almost challenging. "Not yet," he replied. "But if you're willing, I'd like to learn." Her lips pressed together. Not a smile, not a frown, just someone deciding whether to open a door or close it forever. Then finally she nodded. One small nod that meant everything, because after months of distance, silence, and pretending, Amelia had finally stepped into the light, not as someone waiting to be rescued, but as someone choosing to be seen. And for Victor Hale, it was the most important meeting of his life. Victor never forgot the day she sat across from him, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. There were no bright lights, no music swelling, no grand gestures, just two people, finally daring to exist in the same moment without pretending the other wasn't there. But the world didn't pause for their silence. The board began noticing his absences. His leadership team started to whisper. Stockholders wanted meetings, interviews, appearances. Victor had always balanced pressure like a seasoned acrobat, but now his center of gravity had shifted. He still ran his empire, still signed contracts and directed billions, but every morning at 7:42, he was there, not out of ritual anymore, out of choice, and Amelia was showing up too, in small ways, in real ways. They talked now, not for long, not about the weather or shallow things, about art, about why she volunteered at the shelter on weekends, about why she left books behind for strangers. She never spoke about her past, not directly, but sometimes. The shadows in her eyes gave pieces away. Victor never asked. One morning, she brought him a photo, an old one, faded at the corners. A little girl beside a hospital bed, holding her mother's hand. She taught me to notice people. Amelia said softly, even when they didn't notice me. Victor studied the photo, careful not to say too much. She was a nurse, Amelia continued, and she said, everyone has something invisible they carry, so be kind, always. Victor nodded, his throat tight. You carry that well. She looked at him. You think I'm strong? He hesitated. I think you had to be. The next morning, she didn't show up. Then the next. By the fourth day, he was no longer calm. He called the shelter. No answer. He returned to the music hall. Locked doors. He drove past the library. Nothing. He sat in the same chair, surrounded by marble and silence, clutching a cup she hadn't touched. And just when he thought the ache might break through the armor he still wore, Harper walked into the lobby holding her phone. She didn't disappear. She said quietly, she was in an accident. Time stopped. Victor stood slowly. Where? St. Clair's. She's okay. Not critical. But she didn't list family, only an emergency contact from the shelter. Victor was already walking. At the hospital. The nurse looked skeptical at first. Then she saw his eyes. You're the one she draws, the nurse said, almost to herself. Victor blinked. Excuse me, she sketches a man, always in a chair, always waiting. She handed him a visitor's badge, room 311. She's been asking for a sketchbook, but she hasn't spoken much. Victor entered the room slowly. There she was, pale, wires, bandaged hands, and next to her bed her sketchpad. He sat beside her without speaking, just held her hand gently, aware of every bruise, every silence. Her eyes fluttered open, not wide, just enough to find his face. You came, she whispered, voice barely audible. Of course, he said. You didn't leave a note this time. A faint smile tugged at her lips. Didn't think I'd need to. He exhaled, relief flooding him in waves. You scared me. You were scared, she teased, voice raspy. He nodded. More than I've ever been in my life. She looked at him for a long time, as if weighing a truth inside herself. Then, in the quietest voice yet, she said, I didn't want to be seen in a hospital bed. I didn't want you to see me weak. Victor leaned closer. You were never weak, but you don't have to be strong every day either. She closed her eyes, and a tear slipped down her cheek, not from pain, from release. I kept pushing people away, she whispered. I didn't know how not to. You didn't push me, he replied. You made me wait. That's not the same. She opened her eyes again. Why did you? He smiled, tired. But sure, because you're worth it. And because you made me remember that there are some things even CEOs can't rush. A pause. Then her hand squeezed his, weak but deliberate. I don't know how to let someone in, she said. You don't have to, he replied. You just have to leave the door unlocked. She laughed softly, just a breath of it, but it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. Later that evening, he sat by her side as she drifted to sleep, and on the chair beside her bed, he left a cup. Steam rising. Chamomile. No note this time. Just presence. Because sometimes, love doesn't arrive with fireworks or fanfare. Sometimes, it just stays, through accidents, through silence, through healing, waiting, not to be noticed but to be trusted. Asterisk hospitals have a strange way of resetting time. The clocks tick, the machines beep. The world outside continues, but inside those walls, everything slows. Hours feel like minutes. Days feel like a season. Victor had never spent this much time in one place without a single meeting, a single phone call, or a single agenda item. But he stayed, every morning, every evening, and sometimes all night. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. Amelia was healing, slowly. Her hands had started to move again, her voice returning piece by piece. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't look like she was carrying the weight of disappearing. She looked steady, real, present. Each day, she spoke a little more, about small things, about how the nurses reminded her of her mother, how she used to sit at the back of the library as a kid, drawing strangers just to imagine what their lives might look like. I never knew how to be seen, she said one night, staring at the ceiling. So I became really good at watching instead. Victor nodded. Maybe that's why I noticed you. You were the only one who wasn't trying to be noticed. She looked at him, her eyes tired but open. You know, people like you don't usually look twice at people like me. I didn't, he said gently. I looked once, that was enough. A long silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just full. Then, in a voice so quiet it barely existed, she asked, why me? Victor took a deep breath. Because you reminded me what it's like to feel something without needing to control it. You made me stop, look, wait, not out of strategy, out of hope. She stared at him. Then, slowly, she smiled, and in that moment, he saw it, the version of her no one else had taken the time to see. Not the maid, not the quiet girl in the hallway, but the whole woman, strong, soft, brave. 2 weeks later, Amelia was discharged. Victor offered to drive her home. She hesitated, then said yes. Her apartment was small, tucked behind a bookstore and above a coffee shop. The walls were covered with drawing sketches of moments that most people would have missed. A child laughing in the park, a woman clutching flowers at a train station, a man sitting in a lobby chair, holding a porcelain cup. He turned to her. These are incredible. I draw what I can't say, she said, setting down her bag. Victor looked around, then at her. You've been speaking to me from the beginning. I just had to learn how to listen. She sat on the couch, motioning for him to join her. For a while, they said nothing, just existed in the same quiet space they had built without knowing it. Then, she said, you know, I'm not like the women in your world. I don't wear heels. I don't attend galas. I don't know how to navigate people who speak in numbers and profit margins. Victor chuckled. You think I need another person who speaks my language? I already have 10 floors of them. I was looking for someone who makes silence feel safe. Her eyes glistened. And what now? I don't know, he admitted. But I don't want this to be the end. We started something without even realizing it. And it's the only thing that's felt real in a long time. She exhaled. I'm scared. So am I, he said. But fear means there's something worth risking. That night, they didn't make promises. They didn't define what they were. They just sat to people who had spent a lifetime hiding finally choosing to be seen. In the weeks that followed, things changed. Victor returned to work, but not the same man. His time in the lobby wasn't about watching anymore, it was about remembering. Remembering that there are people whose stories don't start in boardrooms, but still carry power. He funded a community art center quietly in Amelia's name. A place for the unnoticed to create, express, and belong. And Amelia, she didn't go back to cleaning. She taught, she painted, she wrote poems and read them on stages. That once terrified her. Their lives didn't merge in a dramatic headline or public spectacle, but they wove together, slowly, authentically. Sometimes, Victor would still find a cup of tea on his office desk. No note, no name. Just steam rising and jasmine in the air. It meant she was thinking of him. And sometimes, he'd show up to her studio with nothing but a sketchpad and a quiet smile. Because some stories don't end with a kiss or a climax. Some stories keep unfolding, wordless, patient, real, the kind that change you, not because they demand it, but because they see you, just as you are. And for Victor and Amelia, that was enough.